When I was a little girl, I, like many other little girls, loved dolls. But I didn't love Bratz or Barbies or Polly Pockets or any of those other mainstream dolls. No, I loved the original porcelain dolls. Their fragility and their beauty fascinated me, and I loved them and I wanted them, even though my parents didn't want me to have them because they didn't think that I could be gentle enough with them. Now, also, when I was a little girl, my grandmother used to take me to plays at a nearby town, and sometimes, if we arrived for the play early and we had nothing to do, we would go to a small shop, an antique store near the playhouse, and just look around. Sometimes she would buy me small things if they were cheap and I liked them. But one day, when we went there because we were early for a play, I found something that was not cheap or small, but something I really felt like I needed. It was a doll. She had curly red hair and a green dress and a handbag, and she had a stand that she stood up on, and when I was small, she was about the same size as my torso. She had these big eyes, and I remember feeling like she was looking at me, and not just that I wanted her because I had always wanted a China doll, but like I needed her, like it would be somehow wrong if I left her behind, like that would be just a bad thing to do. And so I begged my grandmother to buy me this doll, and she wouldn't, but she said that if after the play I remembered and I still wanted this doll, we might come back and see if she was still there. And I didn't want to do that because of course she was the only doll there, and I didn't want someone else to have her. I felt like that would be wrong. But I gave in because my grandmother wasn't going to, and we went to the play, and through the entire thing, I was just thinking about this doll. But after the play finished, my grandmother said that we couldn't go back and get her right away because she had an errand to run, and since she had a whole bunch of other friends at that play, she left me with a couple of her friends while she went off to run her errands. And I think what must have happened at that point is that she actually went back to the store by herself and bought the doll so that she could give it to me as a birthday or Christmas present, rather than giving it to me then and having to buy me another present at the next event, because it was a fairly expensive doll from what I remember. And I'm surprised, honestly, that she managed to hold her ground and not tell me that she bought the doll when she came back to get me and we went to the store and found the doll was gone, because I cried. I was devastated that this doll, someone else had come to get it before I could, because that felt like a tragedy. But I went home and I didn't forget about it, and I was so happy at the next gift-giving event. I don't remember if it was Christmas or my birthday, but I was so happy when I opened this present and found the doll inside. I named her Jennifer because for some reason I've always associated Jennifer with red hair, and it just seemed like her name. And after that, I did almost everything with Jennifer. I had never had a sister, never had a sibling at all, and I felt like Jennifer was my sister. I took her everywhere with me that I could, which my parents didn't like because I was a fairly rough and tumble country child. We lived in the middle of nowhere, but I managed it. Even when I went to play in the pond, I would find a nice clean place to put Jennifer where she wouldn't get muddy, so she could watch me. I couldn't take her to school with me because I was bullied, and I was worried that the other kids would break her because they had actually kicked around my bag a few times, and if I had Jennifer in my bag, that would have broken her for sure. So whenever I had to go to school, I would leave Jennifer on my windowsill so she could watch out the window and she wouldn't be too bored while I was gone. And every day when I came home, I went straight up to get Jennifer so that whatever I did, she could do it with me. Now, my parents suffer from what I called itchy feet syndrome, so we never stayed in the same place for more than 4 years. We moved a lot. And so the time came, a couple years after I got Jennifer, that it was time for us to move again. And instead of having me around for all the moving and stuff because my parents thought I might find it traumatic, they sent me to stay with one of their friends while they did all of that. But I couldn't bring Jennifer with me because I had to limit the amount of stuff I could pack. And my parents told me that she would be safer anyway in the moving truck and nothing would happen to her, and she'd be there when I got back. So my parents moved everything into the moving truck, and Jennifer was one of the last things they'd put in because they needed to be very careful with her and make sure she didn't get crushed by anything, because of course she was very fragile. So she was only in that moving truck for one night by herself. But when my parents came down the next morning, the lid was still on Jennifer's box and nothing was disturbed, but Jennifer herself was on the floor and she had smashed. Her face was in multiple pieces. I don't know how it happened, and neither did my parents, because the lid was still on her box. No one had been in the moving truck. It hadn't moved. Yet somehow Jennifer seemed to have gotten out of her box, put the lid back on, and jumped off the shelf. It seemed to everyone involved, I think, that Jennifer had committed suicide. Probably because she thought we abandoned her, even though we didn't. And I was back the next day. When I saw Jennifer broken, of course I was devastated, and I cried again. My parents told me not to worry, that we could fix her. They made special glue for China and we could stick her back together like nothing ever happened, but I told them that we couldn't, that it wouldn't work, because ever since I had first gotten Jennifer, ever since I first saw her, she had felt alive to me. She had felt like a person, and now she didn't. She didn't feel alive anymore, and I knew instinctually, like when I touched the cat that I grew up with after she died, that there was no life there, that even though it had been alive, that life was gone. And it's true that this isn't probably the scariest story you've ever heard if you are someone who watches a lot of scary stories, but think about this. This is a true story that happened in my life. So remember all of those other stories about dolls that you've heard, like Annie and Robert? If my doll committed suicide, maybe other dolls really can be killers. And it still kind of freaks me out that my doll, something that should never have been alive in the first place, managed to die.